The One Piece manga just showed us exactly why the Sun God Nika's abilities are absolutely broken. Because as we see at the end of chapter 1101, Bonney reveals a completely new power that allowed her to actually imitate Nika's rubber fist, and boy did that leave this miserable government agent completely knocked out. And really all of this has got me thinking that if Bonney's attack was so insanely powerful just by imitating Nika, then Luffy's Nika's abilities are 100% the most game-changing abilities in the story, which of course makes sense for our main character to have, but let's break down what makes them just so ridiculously powerful and what we actually know about Nika at this point in the story. And first, of course, there is the actual rubbery, stretchy abilities that everyone has discussed many times now, but to see it being used by someone else other than Luffy was just really mind-blowing. I mean, do keep in mind here that Bonney was basically just a regular child at this point. She didn't have any special lineage or training that made her extra strong. Well, I guess you could argue about the lineage, but the fact that this partial Nika transformation without knowing what they actually look like allowed her to take out a full-blown government agent is just incredible. But beyond even that though, it is the versatility of these powers that truly make them so strong, because Luffy, and now I guess somewhat for Bonney, they can adapt the powers to whatever they need in order to overcome a battle. But actually on top of all that, there is another part of Nika's abilities that just really stood out to me, which is the power of belief. Because we've now seen all throughout the story that Luffy, and more recently Nika, really end up bringing hope to those who are about to give up and who are basically enslaved and tyrannized by others. Really, you can think back to almost any arc in all of One Piece, and Luffy is always the one who brought hope and freed people from suffering. And then bringing this back to the current storyline, it was Kuma's belief in Nika from a very young age that actually ended up helping him never giving up his search for freedom, and also a cure for Bonney. And so honestly, it was just incredibly awesome and kind of surprising to see that when Bonney needed to escape from the person keeping her hostage, she thought of Nika, and those powers ended up helping her escape. But honestly, it goes even further than that, because at this point, I'm really starting to truly believe that Nika was basically a god that the Buccaneers and even many other races in the One Piece world actually used to worship. Now, if you look really into it, there are actually signs pointing to Sun God Nika being a major religious figure all throughout the story that was erased by the world government at some point. And in case you haven't seen these examples, I can just point out this sun logo here that appears in many important places, such as this cross recently in Kuma's church, the Fishman Sun Pirate symbol, the Kozuki crest, the Alabasta flag, and even in 𝙻𝚎𝚐𝚐 in Shandora. And really the one thing that ties all of these people and all of these different places together, as you know, is their relationship that they have to the ancient kingdom. And so at this point, since we do know that Nika, at least in the form of Joy Boy, was a major figure for the ancient kingdom, I'm really starting to think that Nika might either have been the founder of the ancient kingdom many thousands of years ago, or even a literal god that many of the ancient kingdom allies actually started to worship, which would very much explain how the Buccaneers religion started as well, and that has somewhat carried on to this very day. And actually, while we're talking about religion right here, it's actually important to bring up that I kind of wonder if Mihawk here actually was a former holy knight, which has been speculated a lot on Twitter before, who was eventually then converted to this new Nika religion. Yeah, it does sound crazy, I know, but there are a ton of connections when you think about it between Mihawk and Imu's throne that people have pointed out, such as the markings on the empty throne being very similar to the markings on Mihawk's swords. And actually, the empty throne is modeled after the actual imperial throne of Japan, which does have these two lions as well, but also this chrysanthemum type of logo, which does actually appear on Mihawk's shoulder as well. And on top of that, Mihawk's eyes are of course also eerily similar to that of Imu's. But you might now be wondering how all of this makes sense in terms of him believing in Nika now, and the answer to that is mostly based on his character design. Because clearly he has this whole Christianity vibe going on, which I've discussed in a lot of detail in previous videos. In fact, his cross necklace kind of reminds me a lot of the cross that Kuma had in his church back in the Sorbet Kingdom. Or I mean, look at the pattern of his handle of his sword Yoru. And if Mihawk does actually believe in Nika, then it would also explain why he let good pirates like Luffy and Zoro survive when he so easily could have killed all of them. Plus, of course, if Shanks told him about Luffy and Shanks knows about the truth of the Nika fruit, it would make sense that Mihawk also knows the truth about Luffy being Nika and thus thus kind of sparing his life. And now I just had to bring that up here because it was just so cool to see Bonney's Nika powers, and honestly, this new power might be one of the most broken abilities in the entire story. Like, seriously, when you think about it, just by believing in this new future, Bonney can literally transform her entire body, which doesn't really make any sense. Trust me, I know. So let's break down how this power works and the game-changing side effects that it could have on the end of the Egghead Island arc. Because this power is called Distorted Future, and when Bonney uses it, she can transform part or all of her body into something entirely different than her regular self. We actually first see her use this power back in chapter 1072 when she became this super buff version of herself. And now that we have a better understanding of how this power works, it does seem that Bonney was imagining herself in the future as a buccaneer or maybe just some super strong fighter, and this power made it come true. Which is just a mind-boggling power to have, but it gets even crazier in this chapter because when Bonney was about to be recaptured by the world government, she remembered that Nika had a rubbery body which allowed her to somehow imagine herself as Nika and literally transform herself into a giant Gear 5 version to throw a massive punch. I mean, what? How is that even possible? So, just to clarify, at this point it does seem that as long as Bonney can imagine herself becoming something in the future, even if there is no real way that would possibly happen, then she can actually transform herself in the present. Which, when you first think about it, you might be like, yeah, that's cool and all, but it's not amazing. But if you're thinking that, stop right now thinking that, because this power could be the key to changing the entire One Piece world. Literally. Don't believe me? Listen to all the ways that this single ability could change the end of Egghead Islands. For one, let's start off with Bonney herself, because when we first saw her on Egghead Island, she was about to be executed by a bunch of marine gunfire. However, with her distorted future powers, she could simply turn her body back into a rubbery Nika form, just like what we saw in this chapter. Which means that, just like Luffy, this new rubbery body should allow Bonney to bounce back all types of bullets. So I do know that we're all expecting Kuma to show up and save the day here, or Dragon, but Bonney may not even need him in order to save herself here. In fact, let's not stop there, because what if Bonney imagined a future where she was the strongest swordsman in the world, let's say? Could she then just take one of Zoro's swords and start slicing up Saturn as if she was Mihawk? But really, that's just the start of this, because next let's imagine that Bonney can also use this power on other people except herself. And I mean, why not really? Because she can, after all, use her regular abilities to make people older or younger, or even use this power on Vegapunk to turn him into a baby. So let's assume for a moment that she can actually use Distorted Future on other people as well. And as we know, Luffy was exhausted lying on the ground, but what if Bonney imagines a future where Luffy is completely healed? Or a future where Kizaru is actually an ally instead of an enemy? Or a future where Saturn was so old that he literally turns to dust? See what I'm getting at here? Now, surely there will be some sort of restriction on what she's actually able to do, but the possibilities are just so fun to think about. And honestly, I do think that it would be incredibly powerful if Bonney was the one in the end who saved herself and everyone else instead of Kuma here. I mean, sure, Kuma has been the tragic hero of the entire flashback, but just imagine how great it would be if Bonney didn't need his protection anymore, and instead she's the one who's actually able to save him instead. And what better way to do that than to imagine a future where Kuma never lost his memories, which would bring her adopted father back to his normal old self. And man, I mean, what I personally wouldn't give to see this become reality. But now, as incredible as that would be, I actually do wonder if Bonney has an even greater level to unlock using these powers. Of course, I'm talking about awakening here. Because something to keep in mind about this is that this entire time, Bonney has only had her devil fruit for about 6 years now, which is a relatively short time to master its powers. So I think there's a really good chance here that she hasn't even awakened her devil fruit yet, and what other perfect opportunity could there be for her to do so than in this really high pressure, high stakes, life or death situation on Egghead Island right now. And I know, we can't just say that without actually speculating what that awakening would look like, so let's look at what we actually know about Paramecia type awakenings. Basically, every awakened Paramecia so far we've seen allows the user to use their devil fruit powers on their environment. And so with that in mind, plus our current current understanding of Bonnie's distorted future ability, I think it's fair to wonder if awakening Bonnie's devil fruit could allow her to actually imagine a distorted future of the world around her. Like, for example, a future where Egghead Island was even more technologically advanced than it already is. Does sound funny, but just imagining some kind of laser cannons or something all locked onto Saturn and blasting him to bits, and this idea isn't all that ridiculous when you think about it, since the world used to be even more technologically advanced in the past, according to Vegapunk himself. Or if we wanted to get really crazy, yeah, do it, get really crazy. Well, what if Bonnie could actually affect the entire world somehow with her powers? I'm just literally picturing her imagining a world that is not oppressed by the world government. How cool would that be? Just imagine multiple panels of people and races all over the world living in peace instead of poverty and slavery, which I will admit sounds just way too good to be true, because I mean, then we would basically not need Luffy anymore, but still, you know, it's fun to think about that type of stuff. In the end though, I am very sure that Oda will have some very reasonable restrictions for this power that keep it from being way too broken, as it does seem at first glance, but still, since he is emphasizing it right here, it simply has to play a role now in the climax of Egghead Island as well, I think. And since we're speaking of distorted futures right now, Oda certainly changed my opinion on Monkey D. Dragon a lot in this chapter, because we kind of learned that he was actually keeping close track of Luffy for his entire childhood, basically. That's right, everyone. Dragon isn't a completely deadbeat of a father. Seriously though, it does seem that every time that the revolutionaries would visit the Goa Kingdom, Dragon would actually sneak off and stop by to check on his son. Although to be fair, he very likely kept himself hidden from everyone, including Luffy, and if I had to guess, this is most likely because he was trying to protect Luffy and the villagers from becoming a target of the world government. Either that, or Dragon didn't want Luffy to be captured and used against him in some way or form, kind of keeping his distance so people didn't know about their connection. But either way, it does seem that Dragon actually cared a lot more about Luffy than we all originally thought, which is kind of nice to see, for being honest. Also, by the way, can we just all appreciate for a moment Dragon's stone cold confidence when he tells Kuma that he better stops talking about Luffy unless he wants to die? I mean, wow. We've all seen just how powerful Kuma is during this flashback, so for Dragon to just casually threaten Kuma like that just really shows that Dragon isn't messing around when it comes to his son. But this dynamic between these two father figures is also incredibly interesting in another way, because I do wonder if Dragon's situation is at all like Kuma's here, where he actually lost the person that he loves to the world government. You know, that entire line about a child is a parent's weakness just makes me wonder a lot if Luffy's mother somehow sacrificed herself to the world government in order to protect Luffy, and that is exactly why Dragon eventually left the Marines and ended up starting the revolutionaries. But bringing this all back to Kuma here though, this chapter clearly confirmed that Kuma knew exactly who Luffy was and was also probably looking out for him once he became a pirate. I mean, certainly their meeting at Thriller Bark wasn't the first time that Kuma had seen Luffy, which just makes me question even more if Kuma would have ever gone through with his orders to kill Luffy in the first place. Probably not. And at this point, I really highly doubt it, because it seems like Oda has had Kuma and Dragon's relationship figured out all the way back then already. However, one thing that still confuses me a bit is why didn't Kuma go meet Bonney once she was actually free and a pirate? I mean, sure, he did promise the Gorosei that he would never see her again, but there was definitely time for him to meet with her and then escape the world government together. I mean, just think about it. Kuma at this point didn't have his memories completely erased yet until after Marineford, and at that time, Bonney had been a pirate for a few years already. I mean, I guess you could speculate that the government had already erased those parts of Kuma's memories at that point, which makes a little sense, but on the other hand, in this very chapter, he was shown to still help out the revolutionaries. Plus, he has always used his famous "where would you like to go on vacation" phrase, so there's got to be some sort of memory of Bonney still in there somewhere. And now maybe you could say that he was worried that Bonney would become a slave again, but come on, I mean, Kuma is easily one of the strongest warlords, and it would probably take at least one or more admirals even to take him out, so I definitely think that he could have used his powers to find Bonney and then escape the world government together. I mean, who knows, maybe we'll just find out more about that soon, but no one really can say that Kuma abandoned Bonney here, because at least he was trying to write her letters. However, as we saw in this chapter, these letters then were tragically destroyed by the world government agents watching over Bonney, which really just adds to my anger and to the tragedy that all this time Bonney didn't hear from her adopted father. And if you think about it, Bonney has not heard from Kuma since he left her back in their sorbet kingdom around 2.5 or 3 years ago from the current storyline. However, if it makes you feel a little bit better, there might be some sort of hope for Bonney still reading those letters in the future, because if you look back at the very first time that we saw Kuma send someone away using his powers, he does look down into his Bible before sending this ghost girl away, for example. And to me, that personally means that Kuma was using the Bible to keep all of his notes about the places he wanted to visit with Bonney, so I can just imagine that even if Kuma shows up in Egghead Island and ends up sacrificing himself to save everyone, let's say, then Bonney will probably at least be able to read the book that he leaves behind and maybe visit all the places herself in memory of her adopted father, as sad and tragic as that would be. But now let's actually swing all the way back to the part where Bonney escapes at the end of this chapter, which gives us a hint possibly about one very interesting theory about the Gorosei and Emu. Because during Bonney's plan to escape the world government's agents, we actually find out that these agents don't actually know that Bonney has devil fruit powers. And if we assume that the agents don't know about her powers, then it also makes sense that the rest of the government wouldn't know about them either. I mean, how dumb would that be if Saturn or someone else knew about it but then didn't tell the people watching over Bonney? But let's assume that they actually didn't know at all, which means that the government certainly wasn't using Bonney's powers for themselves. And to give you a little bit more context on why that might be important, we have very long wondered how the Gorosei and Emu seem to be virtually immortal. We've always speculated that it might be the immortality surgery using Lost Fruit, but another really strong option was Bonney's age-related devil fruit abilities as well. But clearly, if the government didn't know that Bonney even had these powers to begin with, then they wouldn't have been using her to keep them young as well. So that just really crosses one potential option of the list for explaining how the Gorosei and Emu appear to have lived for centuries. And really, that's just one of many super interesting little details in this chapter, because during one of Kuma's many visits back to Egghead Island, he also met 𝙻𝚎𝚐𝚐, who is Vegapunk's clone of Ms. Buckingham, the former member of Rox's crew. And what's most interesting about this meeting is that 𝙻𝚎𝚐 is basically a clone who was basically given humanity, while Kuma is becoming a cyborg while losing his humanity. 𝙻𝚎𝚐 even goes as far as to compare the situations and ask which one is the more tragic. And while this is really interesting to think about by itself, I do want to bring this back to the current situation on Egghead Island, where we have a ton of interesting comparisons. First of all, there's obviously the 𝙻𝚎𝚐, who, like 𝙻𝚎𝚐, are actually clones. However, unlike 𝙻𝚎𝚐, they do not seem to have the same kind of freedom and humanity that she does. So basically, this is just another reminder that the 𝙻𝚎𝚐 are going to have a super important role to play in the future, and don't be surprised if they eventually actually gain their own type of freedom where they can act of their own will instead of being forced to follow orders. But that's not all, because we have another human who kind of has to shed his humanity and who is virtually a slave, with Admiral 𝚻𝚎𝚐. And since he has basically given himself up to just following orders, I really do wonder if he will have a real change of heart here and rebel against the orders of the government. Maybe Kuma showing up will inspire him, or something that Bonney does will change him, but I just can't help but see the similarities between 𝚻𝚐𝚐's situation and what 𝙻𝚎𝚐 said in this chapter, and hopefully it will lead to the end of the world government's rule very soon. And even though we've already talked about the new information that Dragon actually kept an eye on Luffy during his childhood, and things have worked out pretty well for Luffy with the way that things are going right now, it really must have been hard for Dragon nonetheless to keep himself from going down and just taking his son and raising him himself. I mean, can you just imagine if you were a parent but had to stay away hidden from your child? Seriously, talk about literal torture. But have you ever wondered what might have happened if Dragon didn't stay away? In other words, what might have happened if Luffy was raised by Dragon? And if you want to check out that video, you can click right here. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in this next one.